Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today our guest is Dr. Robin Wood. Hi Robin.
Hi Ian.
And Robin's written this book, The Great Shift, Catalyzing the Second Renaissance, which I found very interesting. So Robin, what is the Second Renaissance?
Well, we should start with the First Renaissance, which was a European rebirth, rediscovery of the ancient knowledge of the Greeks and escaping from the chains that the church had created around the European psyche, the European consciousness. And just as artists like Michelangelo and inventors like Da Vinci and other great names that we all associate with the First Renaissance flourished in that period and really changed the consciousness of mankind, of what it meant to be a human being, so now, 500 years later, we're seeing a global equivalent in a multipolar, diverse world of a Second Renaissance. And it has many different ingredients to it. One of them is the fact that the technology we have today is unprecedented. It's just incredible what you can do with 600 million people on Facebook. That's 1 in 6 people almost. In terms of art, music, culture, we're creating a global culture for the first time in the history of this planet. In terms of business, we see business spreading around the world and becoming a force for good, as well as profit and the other things that have usually driven business. So it's a very exciting time to be alive, but at the same time, our crisis is a crisis, and we feel a crisis. We can see a crisis all around us, but it's a birth. It's a birth of a new world, a new way of becoming a human being in the 21st century.
So there's an opportunity there, but also there's a great danger, isn't there?
Very real danger.
We go into a real mess as a human race.
Absolutely. That's as Ervin Laszlo always loves to point out, there's a chaos point that we're going through.
Yeah.
Just as when a child is born, it's an extremely dangerous process. Both the mother and the child could die.
Yes.
But normally, thank goodness, they don't. And the child emerges safely into the world and goes, whoa, for the first time, opens its eyes. It's quite that's what we're doing globally today as a species. We're going, wow, look at what's going on. This is amazing, but it's very scary at the same time.
Because Barbara Marx Hubbard does an introduction to your book, and she mentions like it's either evolution or extinction. And then she goes on to say, we have to shift our consciousness, our behaviour, and our systems, and talks about how the systems we have are not really designed for sustainability, so we can't go on the way we are. But I'm particularly interested in starting with how you see we can shift our consciousness.
Well, I think that's the key. And what's happened is that over time, over the last 50, 80,000 years, as we've evolved with fire and from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, now to the Space Age, every one of those ages evolved a coevolution with our technology. So we didn't suddenly begin standing upright. We co-evolved in terms of the way we gathered our food and so on, with our weapons, with the stone axe and so on. So consciousness is not something that just shows up in nature, as you probably noticed. I mean, you look at an ant colony, they're collectively very dynamic and intelligent, but an individual ant's consciousness is, fairly limited. So in human beings, we've had to evolve literally step by step over millions of years, our consciousness. We've now got to the point where it's beautifully captured in a Salvador Dali painting called the Metamorphosis of Narcissus. And you know the myth of Narcissus, where this is the first time that a primitive hunter-gatherer, Homo sapiens, looks in a still pond and he sees his face. And he goes, you can see monkeys doing this. Some of them, monkeys, dolphins also can recognize themselves. We recognized ourselves. We became conscious of ourselves. And on the left-hand side of the painting, there's Narcissus. On the right, there's this whole other culture. And instead of Narcissus looking into the pond, because of course you know what happened to Narcissus. He loved his image so much he fell in and drowned.
Yes, yeah.
So in a way, it's a metaphor for our modernist world, where we're a bunch of narcissists today. Let's face it, we're comfortable. We've never had it so good, especially in the Western world. Yeah, we might bitch and moan about life being not as exactly as we like it. But there's this whole new world on the right-hand side of the Dali painting emerging, and instead of the figure of Narcissus, we see this this egg and this potential arising in a narcissus flower coming out. So that for me is symbolic of the Second Renaissance. We have to see our consciousness as the lens through which all of this is happening all the time. It's not some separate thing that we talk about every now and then. It's actually happening right now as you and I are having this conversation.
So what, as human beings, can we do to try and understand the bigger picture more?
Well, I think the first thing that consciousness and certainly religion, spiritual teachers, and even regular teachers and coaches and all the sorts of people we have helping us today, they tell us that we have to stop, pause, and reflect. And I'd like to talk about that's an opportunity for us to get into a strategic psychological helicopter, to rise above, to transcend the situation we're in.
Because we're actually getting the opposite. Because we're getting, rather than stopping and pausing,
Facebook.
We're getting faster and faster, aren't we?
Twitter. And, stuff going
People
past
are
us like
24
this.
hours on their mobile phones and their computers, as you say, with their emails and everything else, social networking, and we're moving away from stopping.
Well, that's the real challenge. And so for me, personally, that is something I've been preoccupied with my whole life, is this act of what I'd call reinventing the sacred. I think that's a nice way of describing it. Because in the old days, we kind of imbued nature as with sacred qualities, yeah, as a species. And you can still see today hunter-gatherer tribes in the Amazon or the Borneo rainforest do that. Why is that important? Because we recognize in that moment that we are one with that thing we're looking at. We're part of nature, and if that doesn't work, neither do we. We're not separate from it. So, but in a sense, what we got with modern cultures is we said, okay, look, that's nature, this is us. I can now operate on nature. I can make things happen with my tools, my technology. So I'm above nature now.
We think we're in control of nature, don't we?
Yeah, we think we're kind of like on the top of it now. Only 10% of the big fish stocks left in the oceans. We're still losing rainforest, not as much as we were, but we're still losing rainforest. We're still damaging the planet in so many different ways. And we're getting better, but we have to still make a big shift. I mean, that's why the book's called The Great Shift, because we really have a decade or so in which to shift human consciousness irreversibly towards a second renaissance. If in the next decade that doesn't happen, we may be heading for the what we might call the negative, the new Middle Ages scenario.
And it's interesting if we look at your history as such, your personal journey. I know that you were telling me a couple of days ago on the phone that you actually had, when you were, I think it was 8 years old, you started to communicate with God. You would ask God questions and talk to him. And I think you even asked your father some very deep questions like, what is the universe? What is God? So there was something in you calling at a very early age, wasn't there?
Well, yeah, I at the time didn't realize it may be unusual, but it seemed quite natural to me. And in a sense, when looking back on that and looking back at all the people I've met in my life, I've realized that it's in everyone. Everyone has that question, right? They start out with, they look up at the stars and they go, wow, that's a pretty big place. I'm just a speck of dust in this huge universe. Either it's an existential, who cares? We're just here. Get on with it. Yeah. Or maybe there's something more than this. But then you're in a tricky area, because in modern culture, it says, well, look, if that's not scientifically validated, then you're just hallucinating. This God thing you think is out there, it's actually just an illusion in your temporal lobe. It's being proven. So I'm very much I'm what I'd call an inner scientist. I'm an explorer, not only of the world out there, but I'm very keen on seeing the research that's been going on over the last 50 years, especially into psychic phenomena, into the whole paranormal, into near-death experiences, etc., etc. There's hundreds of these things, and I remember Arthur C. Clarke went through 10 of these, and he came out and said 6 of these I rate as existing as a scientist. And I think you'd get a few more today with the existing evidence that's happened since he made that program. So there's a lot of evidence out there if people want to look. The problem is most of us go into our day and we do what we have to do, and then we get home and we pop off to the pub in the evening and get a curry and spend some time with our mates, go to sleep and wake up and do the same thing all over again, right? With a slight variation. So where do you find the time to do that stopping, reflecting, and getting into your consciousness? That, for me, is the big thing.
Well, the point I'm making, looking at your childhood, I also know you started to meditate around 15 years old. So you already had an early start, and your parents, you were brought up in South Africa, your parents were very aware of nature and encouraged you to be in tune with nature. So there was some grounding in you that was built or was supported when you were young. And I know some of us have that. And certainly people who meditate regularly and who are really interested in tune with nature have more of a chance of what you're talking about, stopping, and then I forget what the other two things were. It was stop. Was it feel, the second thing you said?
Yeah, if you can stop, it's almost literally like taking a breath,
Yes.
and sort of saying, okay, so where are we? How's it going here? What's happening? How am I feeling? And you basically begin an inquiry into what's going on.
So you're starting to understand yourself better.
Yeah, and then you begin to see that you actually have choices.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time, unconscious evolution, which is where we've come from historically,
Yes.
is a process where we never have the opportunity to see that we can make choices and to understand what the consequences of those choices will be or could be. Now, okay, even if we might deride Facebook or any of the electronic media, which seem to capture so much of our attention, that what they do is they accelerate our ability to scan and know what's going on. And what we then need to do is to step back from that and say, okay, well, so what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family, my community, my city, my country, the world? Or, if you're Stephen Hawking, what does it mean for the universe, right? But not a lot of people get that opportunity, right? So for me, it's about Joe Average, Joe Blogs, day in and day out, becoming more conscious. That's the hope in the next decade.
And how practical is that hope, do you think?
Well, if it was based on the imperative that we just went out and said, well, Joe Blogs, you have to become more conscious, it would be hopeless. Because wherever people are at in their lives, they need incentives. That's one of the things we'll talk a bit about in Renaissance too.
Yeah.
Is that everyone responds to different incentives. And it's purely psychological in many ways. And so if we understand what drives people at the different stages of their development in different cultures, we can begin to shape ways of communicating that encourage people to become more conscious, to look at the choices, and hopefully to make better choices.
How do we do that? How do we shape these ways of better communicating?
Well, I think it starts in childhood, honestly. I think the fundamental task of any government, it was like when Nelson Mandela was let out of prison and said, what's the most important thing to one of his advisors? And the advisor said, well, actually, it's to take care of the health of the 1 to 3 year olds, to look at their nutrition, because you have so much malnutrition that in the future generations, if you don't do that now, that is going to be a serious thing. And then you've got to look after primary schools, because that's going to be in 30 years' time, the future adults and so on. So I think you've got to start there at the beginning of where human beings come from and how they grow up and what they become conscious of. Now, I think it's a great pity in a way that we've lost. I mean, look at David Cameron's vision of the big society. Why is it difficult to implement? It's a nice vision. Yeah, whichever party you vote for. It'd be lovely to live in a community where everybody contributed and did all that sort of thing. But why is it difficult? Well, because people have lost the habit. We've lost the institutions. We've lost the incentives. We don't do it anymore, right? The pubs are disappearing. The post offices are disappearing. It's not rewarded anymore today to do that. Nobody goes to church. Well, because church is kind of irrelevant now. So we need to radically shape that very quickly into a new form of, I think, consciousness, spirituality, and action, because one without the other doesn't work. You can be conscious without acting, and then that's a tragedy too.
Yeah, and it's also a question, I think, of people realizing that more isn't necessarily better. I remember you telling me when we talked earlier that one of the things that was quite a realization for you when you were a kid was when you were in South Africa was the diversity in living standards. There's people obviously with a lot, and a lot of people with not very much. And that quite shocked you. On the other hand, you said, well, it's also those poor kids, they weren't necessarily unhappy. And we've got to this stage now where people believe that more is better, i.e. more will make them happier. And somehow that doesn't seem to happen. We get more and more, but something is still incomplete in us. Something is still not satisfied. Something within us is still hungry. And that, I wonder how we marry that up with institutions, governments, whatever, taking action.
Well, I think it's very difficult, and the word empowerment comes to mind here, because what we've lost is this sense that we're actually responsible and powerful to do what is needed where we are, right? So what's happened is the nanny state, whether conservative or Labour or whichever country you're in, it doesn't matter. The nanny state takes care of you. The big companies produce the goods and services. You go and do your job. At 5 o'clock, you look at your watch and say, well, that's it, end of the day. I'm done, I'm out of here, and what you do is up to you. That was the first Renaissance. That is not sustainable. Why is it not sustainable? Because that requires hundreds of things to go on in the background to make it possible for you to live this seemingly humdrum modern life. I mean, the Americans are consuming 6 planets. If everybody on this planet lived like an American, we'd need another 5 planets.
Yes.
The Europeans are consuming 3 planets worth of goodies at the moment. And, people in these small developing countries are often consuming very little. So that to me is what we've got to shift. We've got to shift our consciousness, shift our behavior, and then shift the systems we're in, as Barbara Marx Hubbard quite rightly puts it, to get through. I mean, to make this a birth and not a death crisis,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I forget who said it recently, but I think it was on a Conscious TV programme. People only change for 2 reasons: inspiration or desperation.
And I think that's right.
Yeah, and I wonder which will come first for us. Hopefully it's inspiration. That's obviously what you're trying to do with Renaissance too, is to inspire and educate people. And I know you have a chart here I was looking at earlier with see that with the camera with various things here, and again it's conscious evolution, which is for me stuck out as the most important thing here, because if evolution isn't treated in a conscious way, then we just keep living in an unsustainable way.
Absolutely. If I mean, let's put it this way: we have all the technology we need to live sustainably.
So what does that mean? What are you saying, that we can live with the same lifestyle?
No,
Okay.
I'm not.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that we, right now, if we were to do a couple of things, we could change very radically, very quickly, but it would need all of us to do it. So the first thing is that about 60%, coming up for 60% of people will be living in the world's biggest cities very shortly. And that's where most of the energy is consumed and where most of the waste is created.
Okay.
So first of all, we've got to create cities where not a molecule is wasted. And that's completely possible. There are already projects in recycling, what we call cradle to cradle, creating completely non-toxic product flows, clothing that's never produced a toxin, doesn't have any toxins in it, food. And that's happening quite fast, actually. You'd be surprised how fast that's happening. But it's still not enough, because the public is still not demanding it enough. Yeah, and also costs a little bit more sometimes. So we don't want to pay that little bit extra. So we're working on a system called the Green Shift system, which will incentivize people to buy those things that are better choices. So there's a whole consumer and production cycle that has to be detoxified and also waste eliminated. And when you combine that with our buildings, which consume 40% of our energy, right now in the studio we're probably consuming quite a lot of energy, right? You can retrofit buildings, and the government started a scheme to do that. But again, it's not joined up in the way that makes it fast and gets it done quickly.
Well, governments act when people demand things. We've seen it in Egypt the last few days.
They do. And sadly, in countries like Egypt, just like it was when I was in South Africa, things have to get so bad that, there's no alternative but to go on the street. Now, in Britain, it's not quite there yet, but and I think the British culture is one of muddling through. People tend to have a stiff upper lip, and
But you see,
sort of.
it's people. For me, people don't really understand the consequences, and I'm not completely excluding myself from this. I'm not saying I'm above all this. And it's as if like it's too devastating to really think it through. That's what's going to happen. That in my lifetime, maybe it's not my lifetime. Maybe I'm too old. I don't know. But certainly, if I had children in my children's lifetime, there's going to be almost certainly complete chaos. If people really get that, then they will be inspired to act before they have to act through desperation. Now, what stops us getting that, do you think?
Well, human beings have been through one hell of a lot of, shall we say, negative, difficult circumstances in our evolution. We have literally developed the capability to almost block out all of these negative stimuli, this suffering that's going on around us, just to get through, just to survive every day. Because at the end of the day, we're appreciative creatures. We love good music. We love good food. We love a beautiful view.
Abundance, yes.
Yeah, we love to feel life well lived.
Yeah.
And the French have a saying for that. That's l'art de vivre, the art of life. Now we've kind of lost that in the modern world, because we ended up designing, in the first Renaissance way, designing homes to be away from offices and factories and making people travel backwards and forwards between them. We've zoned cities to be very unpleasant places to live and work in generally. And nobody's really happy either way. So there are wonderful examples around the world where they're changing that, whether they're completely redesigning the cities. London's still got a long way to go, but it's probably halfway through a process of transformation right now. It still has a fair way to go, as I say. There's some places which still look like they're Victorian. I think in the north of England I visited towns which haven't changed in 100 years. And maybe they'll make it through too. I know. You saw The Age of Stupid, right? I think most people in Britain have seen that movie. And actually, the key thing about that was that they'd had a showing in a big studio of the first cut of the movie, pre-Pete Postlethwaite.
Yes, he died, didn't he?
Yeah, recently, and it was a disaster. Everybody walked out of that movie saying, "Gee, this is so negative, man. It's depressing." Oh no, we don't want. That's not going to sell. Nobody's going to watch that. So they got old Pete in the studio, and got him to be this bloke looking back from the future.
Yes.
And that completely transformed it, because it wasn't about us feeling bad and terrible. It was objective. It was saying, look, he transcended the problem and said, look what could happen. He said, this could happen. He didn't say it is going to happen.
Yes.
He left that little bit of room for us to say, well, maybe if we did this and that and the other, it won't happen.
But I still felt with that film that I thought the film was good. I thought it was great. I forget the film director's name, the woman who did it, but she did it, by raising money from lots of people, small amounts of money, which is brilliant, and it was a very good quality film. But somehow I came out thinking, well, it was about, and there was where I went to one of the premieres in Reading. It was again, it was good. There was lots of premieres that were done live, and discussion afterwards, and it was about, well, we should protest to get the government to do so and so, whereas, it all starts here. I remember thinking of like James Lovelock when he first came up with the Gaia theory. I'd never thought of this. We are all connected. We are all from the same source. And if we start to realise that, this starts to change fast by inspiration and desperation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's one of the inspirations for Renaissance 2 for me was exactly that insight, was that there's way too much negative talk. It doesn't motivate anybody to do anything. What motivates people is hope. What motivates people is a vision of change, of things that are working. So we've been working with a number of partners around the world who are also engaged in many, many projects to say, well, what we really have to all do together, and that's everyone on the planet doing anything that's going to make a difference. We have to scan for what's out there, for what's working. We have to map it. I was in Paris last week doing a talk with a whole lot of big companies. they're all, even for the French, desperately looking for big solutions. The big water companies, electricity companies, all working around the world saying, how can we, shift this? How can we design a planet that's sustainable? And by looking at examples of what people have done and how fast. Now, you just take this example. 15 years ago, I was sitting in Silicon Valley with 110 executives of a Hewlett-Packard and a few consultants and futurists and so on. We were looking at this thing called the Internet. There were no users of the Internet. There wasn't even a web browser. Netscape had just IPO'd. Today, there are 4 billion people with mobile phones, 2 billion people plugging into the Internet. 15 years. It's nothing. That is what's possible. So that kind of vision is what inspires me. I can see incredible possibilities coming down the road. I mean, nanotechnology that takes solar film, where you got crystalline panels that have 15 to 20% return. To give you some idea, a leaf, if this was a real bamboo tree, this leaf here would take, of the 100% of the sunshine that hits the leaf, it converts 3% into energy for the plant, right? Chlorophyll does that.
Really?
3%.
Yeah.
So a good organic solar panel, bio panel, can do about 10% now. A crystalline can do up to 20%. They've just come out with a brand new version with nanotechnology, which does 50. That's, wow, 16 and a bit times more powerful than this leaf. And zero impact on the environment. Just goes straight into energy, into the grid. So there's hope. The problem is that nobody's talking about it. This is what amazes me about politicians, about the business people, the television. You watch this stuff that's supposed to be called entertainment, and there's no information, no news, no nothing. I mean, can you believe that? It just seems hard to me to believe it.
You see, I think what's interesting is leadership. You're right. In the last UK general election, there was debates between the party leaders, and it wasn't brought up once, the environmental factor. It's because I presume they assumed it wasn't important for the electorate. The Green Party did end up with one member of Parliament, which was improving because they actually had none before. But it comes back to, where are the new leaders? And I've asked other people this too. It's as if they haven't really come into the domain yet where we can see them, where they I guess they're still below the radar level, but there must be real leaders who have vision. Maybe you're one of them, that have the vision, they have the knowledge, they have the ability to inspire people, to get to the right people in the network, to make things happen. I think Richard Branson, I think about a year ago, he was, he's a great one for getting publicity. He was going to give a reward for some kind of sustainable development. I don't know whether it went anywhere, but that's what it needs. I think it needs leaders that people trust, that have the right values, that see the future.
Absolutely. That is one of our biggest focal points at the moment. And I'm wearing a tie today, not because I normally wear a tie, but because I went to see one of those leaders down the road.
Right.
And there are many leaders working with each other. And right now there's this huge opportunity in the Middle East and North Africa to you think Britain's got problems. You go into a country that's got 40% of unemployment, so that half of the people under 25 don't have a job. Mm. What's the future of that country look like? Well, the answer is not too good. Mm. And so, question, how are we going to create work? How are we going to create futures for all of these people?
Well, you tell me.
Well, our leaders, so-called leaders at the moment, are aware of these problems. They've finally worked out, I think they're getting to understand that the number one question that has to be resolved is empowerment. You have to give these people ownership of their future. You have to give them the tools, the means, the processes, the maps to begin to work together. And much as, he's often criticized, but the work that Prince Charles has done in the inner cities with his foundation has actually helped a lot of people. The thing is, it may not have gone far enough to create the jobs, to create the futures, to do the exciting things that 17-year-olds want to do. Yeah, I'm just so delighted. My kids are at the Brit School now. The Brit School, the Brit Awards, is a fantastic place for people to learn to do something they love, right? To go to and get a job.
Yes.
And for me, that's critical. If you can make a difference and make a living and follow your passion, that is what makes all the difference in the world. And then conscious evolution in that case is really being sufficiently self-aware to know when you're in your zone, when you're in the flow.
Now, what does that mean practically, when you're in the zone, when you're in the flow?
Well, it's classically sports people, musicians, artists know this very well. Because when you're in a high-performance game, as it were, your audience, you can tell when you're off, and your audience can tell when you're off, right?
Okay.
I mean, the notes, it just doesn't sound the same, particularly in music. But if you're in the flow, I mean, the previous interview was very interesting. There was a guy talking about the whole artistic experience.
Yes.
And I'm also a musician and
Yes.
artist, so I know exactly. It's actually much better to be a little risk-taking and to be a little on the dangerous edge and to do some really cool stuff that you're proud of later than to be risk-averse and hope nothing goes wrong. Because you're not really in the zone when you're being risk-averse. And I think that's what I'd call a conventional approach to life. And that's part of our problem today, is everybody wants conventional success. I mean, and I'm really sounding old here, but reality TV for me is deadly. I mean, it's like everybody wants to be like everybody else. There's no originality. There's very little authenticity. Even when you listen to the X Factor, it's the same old songs and music and stuff coming out. Where are the leaders? Where's the new?
See,
That's our job.
What you're actually saying is that everyone has a zone and everyone has a flow, and it isn't necessarily about doing something famous or something glamorous, maybe like making a record. It's about trying to find in your own life your own flow.
Yeah, it's finding those moments in the day where you go, wow, this is really cool. I'm loving this.
Okay, let's focus on this. I think this is really practical for people. So how is someone watching this that doesn't know much about this going to know when they're in their zone, in their flow? What are the signs they're looking for?
Well, I think it's all to do with energy. You know how most of us wake up in the morning and have to boot. It takes a while.
Okay.
When you're young, you tend to jump out of bed and go, "Whoa, another day, fantastic!" And off you go. But as you get older and you get into this conventional world, you have to boot yourself up. And by about sort of 10 in the morning, you're kind of getting into a bit of a zone, maybe, if you're doing something you enjoy. You definitely know when you're not in the zone, though, because that's when you're having one of those days, right? And nothing seems to go right. We all know what those days are like. And we've got so far away from what our passion is, what we really should be doing, we've lost track. Now, it's exactly then that you should stop. Instead of banging your head against a brick wall and say, whoa, take a deep breath. This isn't working. Why isn't it working? Yeah? What is it about me? What am I doing? What am I doing to create this situation?
So
Step back.
Coming back, as you're
Let
saying,
go.
stop, have a look, see how you feel. And I guess for a kid, maybe talked about a lot of unemployment unemployment in this country as well. It's about seeing what's possible and not necessarily relying on other people. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
It's developing a sense of responsibility and empowerment. Now, because the first Renaissance systems we've created have taken that away from us, and because our education system is designed to bang that out of kids by the time they're sort of 10 years old, and follow the curriculum and this and that and the other, we've created a society where being creative is actually being a rebel, where you have to buck the system. I mean, I've spent my entire life being a rebel in one sense or the other, being a maverick. Because that's kind of my passion. I couldn't do what I love if I had to be a guy in a suit most of the time. And I think for most people, they know the difference between when they're in that zone and when they're not. And so when you're not in the zone, stop. Take a deep breath, reflect. See if you can transcend the situation. See if you can look down on yourself and actually see, what are you doing to create this? What's happening? What do you need to do next? And then it's a gradual process. It's not an instant. I mean, a lot of these spiritual folks and these high-performance coaches tend to talk as if they had a revelation one day and then suddenly it all became clear. But actually, in my experience, what happens is you have those breakthrough moments. You have those exciting visions, pictures that suddenly come to you. I could do that. I could have a dream. And I was talking to somebody today about this in the Arab world. The Arabs have this really weird word. I think it's called kabir, which means I have a dream, I can see it happening. And it's every one of us on the planet has that ability. We just don't realize we can turn that into reality. Yeah, that's our job, to take our dream, what we can see,
Yes.
turn it into reality, and never let anybody else tell you how it is. You are the one who determines how it is. That's it. You are the empowered one. Every one of us. Buddha put it perfectly. God, or whatever you want to call him, he's inside of every living creature. So we have that responsibility and that duty.
Yeah, you talk in your book about transactivists, and I guess this is what you're talking about. Is it action on different levels?
Yes, it's the very first thing that you have to do as a transactivist is to transcend the situation you're in. Get into that helicopter, look down on the situation, see what's going on. Then you basically have to decide, well, how could I influence the situation so that it would have a better outcome, a win-win-win outcome, preferably. Yeah, that's not always possible, but it's desirable. So you go for that. If that doesn't work, you go for something that's at least not going to harm anybody. And sometimes you just have to run real fast. It depends where you are and what's going on. But the fact is, that's step one. Once you've done that, you can then begin to transform the situation and communicate influentially in the situation. That's a skill that we all need to learn. We need to learn how to ask for what we need, yeah, how to see what other people need and find a win-win situation. And it's something we have to do every day, right? Especially when you're in this chaos zone. And the third thing a transactivist does is they transact. They look for exchanges. They look for complementary things. They look for other people that can do things they can't do. They look for a way in which you can complete this jigsaw puzzle that is your dream, and your passion.
People that have a talent that you don't have, and you're working together, or you have some kind of relationship with them.
Yeah, and I like to use the word ecosystem because really we are all creating our own ecosystem. Personally, I love social networking because although it might be a bit time consuming, it's a lesson. It's a way of finding out who you get on with, who shares your passion, who's commenting on your posts, and it's a learning process. It's taking place on a global scale now. And it's free. So if you do it effectively, it's another great way to open yourself up a bit to what's going on, meet new people, connect with them, and do cool stuff together.
So tell me more about what Renaissance 2 actually does.
Well, the first thing that we started doing was we realized we needed to bring together. You mentioned Richard Branson. He was actually one of the inspirations for this. I was reading his book in South Africa, funnily enough, on a holiday, and driving, through this beautiful country with all these shanty towns and, sort of signs of poverty and stuff still, if not more, than when I was young. And thinking, there's just got to be some way to get these innovative people around the world who all want to make a difference to stop reinventing the wheel. Because I've met so many people in so many countries that are doing great stuff, and they don't know about the other person on the other side of the planet doing exactly the same thing. It could have taken them half the time and cost half the money to do what they're doing now. And you multiply that by a few million, and that's the situation we have. We have people all over the world doing great stuff, and the biggest challenge now is speed. We have to move fast. So we can't afford to take all the resources we have and fritter them away in zillions of little projects. We need to scale the things that are really good and that work. And that's where you've got to get business and government to pay attention, because whether you like it or not, they often hold some of the very big levers that mean you can stop or you can go.
Well, business you'll get their attention if they think they can make money from it.
Exactly. Well, that's one of the incentives. There are so many incentives. So one of the things we focused on in Renaissance 2 is what we call the green shift system. And it's a way of, if you like, putting a card in people's pockets, which enables them every time they buy something, every time they go anywhere, using this card, they get a reward. And some of that money goes into ethical investments. If you're, let's say, a 15-year-old kid in Africa, what you're spending your money on, some of that will actually go into potentially a trust fund for your education. You get a choice, basically. You create a portfolio. And that's a lifelong relationship you have with this green shift system, What business gets out of it is they get a group of people who will try out new things, new green products, new services. There's what I'd call an enlightened reality TV show concept inside it. So we've been developing with some TV producers. Enlightened reality TV. Well, it's 15 to say 30-year-olds who are passionate about doing something, and just like you have on The Apprentice and the Dragon's Den and all these other shows, you see shots of people, going for it and learning and making mistakes and coming together, and then some of them will have done amazing things, and some of them will have not done so well, and that's fine, because the goal here is not to win, or not to get thrown off the show, which is unfortunately what happens in normal reality TV. But the goal is to see who can make the biggest impact.
Yes.
Yeah, and then to reward that and celebrate that. Because I see a shift here. The generation that we call Generation Z, the Millennials, the we generation, they are quite an amazing generation. They seem to be the most civic-minded, selfless generation I've certainly seen in my lifetime. So I think they're a bit tired of us baby boomers, Generation X, and then Generation Y, the Dilbert generation. They really want to see things happen. And that's what's happening in Egypt. Half of those populations in those countries in the Middle East and North Africa are under 25. They're Generation Z, the we generation.
And it's their future that we're strongly influencing what we do with our lifestyle on the planet.
It's totally up to them, actually. I mean, what we can do best is kind of give them the means to do what they need to do and get out of the way. That's really, like with your own children, essentially. Yes. You're a facilitator. It was Khalil Gibran who said, your child is simply an arrow that you pick up from the quiver and you put it in your bow and you let it go, and it will fall wherever it falls. But it's not up to you to decide. That all you can do is, launch it off into life. And so for Renaissance too, we work with a lot of youth organizations and younger people to bring that volunteer energy and excitement into what we're doing.
And how do you think you get that more into the media? Because you were saying earlier, it doesn't really get publicity. The media focuses more on the negative rather than the positive.
That's a very, very big challenge. And so what we have to do is we have to find the right formula. Literally a program that sells and that's entertaining and fun and educational at the same time. And so we've been working on this with a number of different TV producers and people who've done reality TV in the past. And we've got a number of different formats. We're probably going to try a few of them out. And we're going to combine that together with the activity. So what they're actually doing is doing good anyway. There's a lot of people doing fantastic things. If you and I went with TV cameras now to a variety of places in London or anywhere in the UK, we would be able to find those people doing these cool things. And they'd be able to tell us amazing stories. Yeah? And people would be interested in watching that. So that, I think, is a transformative medium. I think we have to get to that point.
Well, I'm happy to make you an offer now. If you can find some people to come in the studio here for an afternoon or something to talk about it, we'll film it. Happy to do that.
That would be exactly what would be.
They could sit on the settee there, one after the other, and you can sit here with me and we talk with them. Happy to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And there are hundreds of fantastic stories of what people are doing, and I think the difficulty is that it's got to be packaged. That's the problem with us today, is we're so media savvy that we react like, oh, that's a bit amateurish. That's kind of YouTube stuff, right?
Yeah, you see, I don't know if I entirely agree, because I remember when the banking system almost collapsed, whatever it was, 2 years ago. That really shook people. It shook people I knew of all different ages, because they thought, well, the banks, money, it goes on forever, it's stable.
Yeah.
And they realised that, the thing about the ecology and global warming, you hear different reports and different people say different things, but that was a practical thing. And I gather Gordon Brown says in his biography, I haven't read it, but I just read a quote from it, that actually we got so close, we got within about 12 hours of the UK banking system collapsing. Mm-hmm. It was that near. And people realised that. And I think people realise that life can't go on as it is, but they feel helpless. They don't know in their own worlds what to do. Now, you've covered some practical things about stopping and feeling. And when you're young, you know, you're more adventurous and you have probably more energy. When you're older with responsibility, you've got your own family and your job, and you've got to, we know the story of the mortgage and everything. That's not so easy. But it's interesting. I'm just thinking now of when we had it was a big furor about GM food a few years ago in the UK, and people stopped, including my wife, stopped. You know, they would question in the supermarket, "Is this GM? I'm not going to buy it." How that got to people, and the GM food was off those supermarket shelves within a few days. Didn't have it anymore,
Absolutely.
and it needs that critical thing again. You know, people will act if they feel strongly enough, and if they feel there's something they can do.
Well, absolutely. I think awareness is critical. Without awareness, you don't get engagement. Now, once you engage people, they will find for themselves, but you can also provide them with the information they need and the connections they need to find out for themselves and make their decisions as consumers and citizens, right? Then beyond that, you've actually got to get them to the point where they say, okay, now how can I do something in my community, in my school, my, you know, whatever, my job, my company, my home, that makes a difference? And put the enabling resources at their fingertips again. Now this, if I'd been sitting on this couch 10 years ago, that would have been a pipe dream, simply because of the cost. It would have been unbelievably expensive. But today, it's not. We have the technology right now to do that. Yeah. So one of the green shift system that we're working on involves an online game as well as real world events. We're hoping that we'll be able to slot in after the Olympics next year to hold a real world event, and we'll be bringing people from hundreds of countries to London to sort of mirror the Olympics, but it'll be the Olympics of sustainability, not sport sort of Olympics, but the same energy, the same passion to
Olympics of sustainability.
you know, to be excited about actually creating a future, a sustainable future. Because what we fail to do, and I mean we in the sense of the politicians, the business people, the environmentalists, the activists generally, what we fail to do is engage the mainstream. We've preached to the mainstream, we've told them how it should be, what they should do, and they've done a lot of it. They've put in the light bulbs, and you know they've made changes. They've started recycling them or whatever, and then that's it. Well, we've done that now. Forget that. Back to life as we live it. And what we need to do is we need to just gradually educate, engage, and get people passionate about this in their own way with the right incentives. And I think that's doable. I honestly do think it's completely doable. It takes imagination, and it takes a Branson. It takes people like a Branson.
You see, I think the word you use, the clue for me is passion. And like, if you're in the zone, your zone. If you're in your flow, you're in your passion. And it is this alignment, isn't it? Not only on a personal basis, but with realizing that we all come from the same source as well, and having a passion about that. And somehow we lose that too much with feeling separate and competition and everything else.
Well, and we create the environment that makes us feel like that. You know, it's been shown so many times that we're very much reacting to an environment most of the time. If it's a competitive environment, we'll get competitive. If it's an environment that encourages collaboration, then we'll collaborate. So we've understood enough of human psychology now to see how to design in the things that incentivize us to collaborate, to find our passion, to be our best, you know, to have an S factor rather than an X factor show, you know, a sustainability factor. Imagine that.
Yeah.
You know, people queuing up outside the halls around the country wanting to get in. I can see that. I can see that's completely doable. But you'd have to get Simon Cowell and his ilk to get excited about that. We need celebrities. We need heroes. We need sports people. We need, you know, people of all talents, all walks in this. That's one of our goals, is to engage them.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes left. I think we've covered a lot during that time. Anything else you want to say about Renaissance 2 in those last couple of minutes?
Good question. I mean, I think for me, it comes down to creativity and imagination that are really our biggest resources. individually and collectively. And for me, again, and for Renaissance too, one of the reasons we're using that as a metaphor is that's exactly what the first Renaissance was. It was an unleashing and a flowering of creativity and excitement, which we still remember today in the art and the music and so on. And I believe that that's what we've got to create now, and then this time in history, is an excitement about the future that appeals to human imagination and to human creativity. And that is the power that's going to power us into a second Renaissance.
Great. Well, it's been very inspiring, Robin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Coming
much.
on to Conscious TV. And The Great Shift, Catalyzing the Second Renaissance. You can read in more detail what Robin's talking about in his organisation. And thank you for watching Conscious TV. And I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.